In Acts 1:3, Luke tells us that Jesus presented himself alive, zonta, by many evidences. Now, as we move to Acts 1:4, we see one of those appearances where he says something very significant to his disciples. Let's read it together in Greek. Acts 1:4, Kai sua lidzamenas parengelen autois apa hierosalumon me choridzistai ala perimenein tein evangelion tu patras hein ekusate mu. Translation, and while he was gathered together, understood, with them, he commanded them not to depart from Jerusalem, but to await the promise from the Father, which you have heard from me. Now let's look at the verbals first. There is one main verb in this verse, parengelen, and then there are a few participles and infinitives. There's a participle here, suan lidzamenas. There is an infinitive here, choridzistai, and another infinitive here, and also an indicative here. Now, the reason I put only the parangelen in yellow is that it is the main verb in this verse. The rest of these, the participle, suan lidzamenas, the two infinitives, choridzistai, perimenein, and the indicative here are all part of subordinate clauses. Even the indicative here is part of a relative clause. So the main verb here is parengelen. Let's just go and look at the parsings in Acts 1:4 so you know for sure what we're looking at. First of all, suna lidzamenas is a present middle participle from the verb suna lidzamai, which means to gather together. We'll be looking at that in a little bit more detail. Parengelen, the main verb in the verse, aorist, active, indicative, third singular, from parangelo, promise. Then these two infinitives, one is present middle passive infinitive from chorizo, and then the present active infinitive perimenein from perimeno. And then finally, akusate is the aorist active indicative second plural from akuo. Now back to the verse. Suna lidzamenas is a participle, and this is without any real doubt a temporal participle with the idea of while he was gathering together with them. Present verbal aspect is stressing the process here, that while he was gathering together with them. And then, of course, parengelen is a command. He commanded them. Now, what did he commanded them? He commanded them not to depart from Jerusalem. Now, before we look at these infinitives, just a word about Jerusalem. Notice that it's in the plural. That should not shock us because there are a couple of cities that oftentimes appear in the plural. Athens will appear in the plural. Jerusalem will appear in the plural. As a matter of fact, Philippi always appears in the plural, and even Colossae. So this is not an odd thing to encounter. It's an idiomatic plural, as A.T. Robertson calls it. Now, creating a little space here, let's look a little bit further at these infinitives. These present infinitives are what we call indirect discourse. Very important grammatical feature, oftentimes appearing in the New Testament, particularly in narrative. An indirect discourse is basically taking a direct quote. Sometimes the word discourse confuses students. So if you just think indirect discourse is an indirect quotation, and a direct discourse is a direct quotation, I think you should understand, you'll be able to understand it. So what did he command them? Not to depart, but to await the promise from the Father. If you can take what you think to be an indirect quote and turn it into a direct quote, then you've got indirect discourse. Now, what would the direct quotation be? If we put quotation marks around Jesus' command, it would be this: do not depart, but wait. Okay, that's what Jesus said. Do not depart, but wait. Now, if you turn it into indirect quotation, because Luke is reporting this is sometimes called reported speech, it becomes indirect discourse. The infinitive is one of the favorite ways to express indirect discourse. It can also be done by hati, and the indicative, and it can also be done with the participle. But in the book of Acts, you'll oftentimes see it as an infinitive. So while he was gathered together, he commanded them not to depart from Jerusalem, but to await, perimeno, the promise. This is from the Father. This is probably a subjective genitive. Subjective genitive is when the head noun and the genitive appear, if the word in the genitive can express the action that's inherent in the verbal idea of the noun. The verbal idea here is promise, the verb promise. So if we can say await for what the Father promised, then we have in the genitive word a subjective genitive. All right, so he gathered together. He commanded them not to depart from Jerusalem, but to await the promise from the Father, or the Father's promise. And then notice this shift here. It's important that you notice this shift, because what's going on here is a shift from indirect discourse to direct discourse. Now, what do I mean by that? Notice this is a relative clause. This is a relative pronoun here, hein, referring back, of course, to the promise, which you have heard. So here Luke is reporting the speech of Jesus by saying he commanded that they not depart from Jerusalem, but then he actually switches to indirect discourse here, direct discourse, which you have heard from me. It's still a subordinate clause, but the shift to the second plural, akusate, from the third singular here, parengulan, indicates a switch to a direct quotation of the Lord Jesus as expressed by Luke. The mu here is probably a genitive of source, which you have heard from me. Now, this is just the type of thing that might cause a later scribe to want to improve on. And here we have one of those unique and different text variants, and it looks like the scribe of Codex Bezae, a Gospel in the Acts text from the around 400 AD, where he tries to improve on the grammar. Let me show you this. Here is the text reading that we have no doubt was original. The promise of the Father, which you heard from me. But the scribe of Codex Bezae thought that he could improve on that grammar, and here's the way he did it. Now, I have an actual image from Codex Bezae here, but to help you understand it, I have the corresponding Greek words here. So here we have tain, which corresponds to this tain. Here we have epangaleon, which corresponds to epangelion. Notice here a variant spelling which is very common. This is what is called itacism. Scribes oftentimes read epsilon iota and iota together as the same E. So here is the promise up here now. We have the two patros. All right, that's pretty good. And we've got the ain here, corresponding to the ain right here. But now notice a kusate. The scribe forgot to put in the tau epsilon here, so I have it raised like that. But now here's the addition. Phasin, which it means he said, and notice this, dia tu stomatos mu, which he said through my mouth. It's like the scribe is trying to improve and make you understand this indirect discourse switching to direct discourse, that it's Jesus actually who's saying it. Of course, we sort of laugh at this because it's not really needed, because Blas de Brunner Funk in his grammar documents that it's not uncommon for a writer to switch from indirect discourse to direct discourse. So every now and then as we go through Acts, we'll be looking at some of these, what I call fun readings that almost are a commentary by the scribe of Codex Beza. So here we have, and while he was gathered together, he commanded them not to depart from Jerusalem, but to await for the promise from the Father, which you have heard from me.